Hi, welcome to my channel to listen to sinister stories. A few years ago, during the cold winter month of December, I had recently settled into my current home. The day in question was particularly snowy, resulting in the closure of my workplace. Taking advantage of the unexpected day off, I lazily lounged around the house, spending most of my time in the basement, which served as my game and TV room. As I laid on the couch, engrossed in a TV show, a sudden loud banging sound reverberated through the house, even reaching the depths of the basement and overpowering the surround sound system. Initially, being in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I assumed it was one of my friends, trying to play a prank by aggressively pounding on the door. Irritated by their obnoxiousness, I decided to simply ignore it and continued watching TV. Surely, if it was a friend, they would call or text, while persistent cookie sellers would be politely turned away, considering the treacherous road conditions caused by the recent snowstorm. However, curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I ventured upstairs to see if there was anything left on the porch, or if it was indeed one of my friends waiting for me to open the door. Peeking through the curtain, I noticed no one outside and cautiously unlocked the door. To my surprise, there was no one on the porch. The snowy street lay empty, except for a black Cadillac slowly creeping up the road, bearing 4 individuals. One of them, in the midst of climbing into the back seat, caught sight of me as my front door swung open. His eyes locked onto mine, his gaze penetrating, as if contemplating the risks of breaking into a house with an occupant versus seeking an easier target. Their car eventually disappeared from my sight. Feeling unnerved by the encounter, I quickly locked the door and tried to resume my day off, dismissing the incident as peculiar. Little did I know that later that day, news broke about a home invasion that occurred further up my street, just around 4 miles away. In this incident, an unsuspecting woman had been tied up and robbed at gunpoint while she slept, only managing to free herself and seek help from a neighbor. The realization began to dawn on me that the very same 4 individuals I'd seen outside my house could have easily mistaken my home as empty, leading them to forcibly enter. The memory of the man's intense stare, considering his options, still haunted me to this day. In a separate incident, my job at a department store provided a stark contrast to my quiet suburban life. Although retail wasn't my ideal profession, it was certainly an improvement from my previous work in the food industry. It was mid-January, and the store's foot traffic typically dwindled towards closing time. The month following Christmas never attracted many shoppers who seemed hesitant to spend money after the gift-giving season, especially considering the frigid Canadian winter weather. As a result, fewer staff members were scheduled for shifts, leaving me alone in the fitting room. The fitting room, located adjacent to the beauty section, was usually low-key during this time of year. I had some casual conversations with my coworker from the jewelry section as the occasional customer visited to try on clothes. One particular customer caught my attention, a man who entered the fitting room with 2 dress shirts. At first glance, he appeared unremarkable, yet decently dressed in what seemed to be an expensive suit carrying a high-quality shoulder bag. Assuming he had visited the store after work, I assigned him a numbered tag, mandatory for monitoring clothing items to prevent theft. Politely, in accordance with Quebec's language requirements, I requested that he hang the clothes back on the hanger, speaking to him in French. He replied with a simple, "No problem," revealing a noticeable accent that I struggled to place, possibly Russian, but uncertain. As time passed, ensuring the smooth flow of customers and verifying the clothing articles they brought out, I assisted other individuals matching their items with their assigned numbers and returned them to the appropriate racks. Eventually, the man emerged from the fitting room, indicating he didn't want any of the clothes. I graciously accepted them, retrieving his numbered tag, and thanked him. However, to my surprise, he lingered, not making any attempts to leave. Politely, I inquired if there was anything else he needed or if he had changed his mind about the shirts I had just put away. Instead of responding, he maintained a smile and gazed at me, igniting a peculiar unease in the pit of my stomach. It felt as if he wanted to convey something, and being a petite woman who disliked confrontation, I nervously chuckled, attempting to diffuse the tension, fiddling with the desks near the entrance of the fitting room, even though they were already in order. I sought to distract myself from his lingering presence. Awkwardly arranging the numbers, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the man's prolonged stay began to unsettle me. balancing my reluctance to be rude with my growing discomfort. I mustered the nerve to ask if there was anything else he required assistance with. When I began to get really scared, he proceeded to tell me that he will be waiting for me at 9:30 outside the doors of our store, and he wanted to take me out confused. I looked at him oddly. How did he know that we finished at that time? The store closed at 9, and we usually spent 30 minutes cleaning up the store. I suppose that information isn't super hard to guess, but it still felt weird. Why did he want to take me out? I once again laughed nervously, because that seemed to be the only thing I was able to do when uncomfortable, and I politely declined, saying I had to get home and study. He then laughed, taking a step closer to me, and I instinctively took a step back. He didn't accept my answer because he just smiled once more. I'll be waiting for you outside the door where all the employees leave from in the truck alley. I'll be right there. There was a door that employees exited the mall from because the normal doors were usually locked around 9:15, and we always finish later than that. So we take the door that takes us in a slight alley where all the trucks go to drop off shipments for our store. Being someone who hates confrontation and who doesn't do well with controlling my emotions, I felt myself start to tear up at this exact comment. No employee is allowed to mention the door we leave from. It's a company rule since we usually finish late and the parking lot is dark. They don't want anyone to know where we exit from as a precaution. I told him once more that I appreciated his offer, but I wasn't interested, and I had to continue my work. I politely told him to leave when he put a hand on my shoulder, and I felt myself freeze up. I remember thinking and just praying that one of my coworkers would show up, or the jewelry employee would stop filling the cases and turn around with my love. Though nobody did, he told me I was a beautiful girl and that he couldn't wait to meet me in the alley at the end of my shift. He also said that he has a nice apartment and had a cute dog, as if the dog was going to make me change my mind and we could have a fun time, at this point being absolutely desperate. I said I have a boyfriend and he was going to be picking me up, hoping that would deter him, but he just laughed. He said my name and then told me. That wasn't something that usually stopped him. I honestly really began to feel scared, and I excused myself to use the phone on my desk, shaking his hand off of me that I hadn't realized was gripping on me so tightly. I paged the number from my coordinator, who curtly replied before I was even able to get a word in that she was busy with a customer, and hung up, unsure of what to do, as the man was still next to me as he followed me to my desk. I called my manager, who thankfully replied. When he saw that I was speaking with someone on the phone, he left the fitting room. But that didn't make me feel any better. I told my manager what happened, and with good reason. She freaked out, telling me I need to report him immediately, reminding me with people like that I have to be really careful. She told me to call security, and I did. The security guard told me he had an eye on him through the camera. It was around 8:30 at this point, and I was getting ready to start my closing task, still paranoid about what the man had said. This sounded like the beginning of an abduction movie to me. Honestly, I eventually calmed down a little bit, not seeing the man anymore. When the security guard called me back, he wanted to let me know that the man had never left and was circling the store. I felt more and more dread than before pop up in my stomach. He didn't leave. Thankfully, he hadn't come back to see me, though it felt kind of better for the fact that the security guard had seen him. So if anything did happen, there was at least someone who was able to identify him by the time the store closed, and it was time to leave. Two of my coworkers, Evan and Ethan, two boys who worked in the warehouse, made sure to walk with me all the way to my car, not letting me be alone. I appreciated that a lot, although I didn't want to admit it. I was scared walking through the alley, and I was even paranoid he was going to follow me home. I took the extra long route to see if anyone was trailing me, which he wasn't, when I walked through the safety of my door of my house and locked it behind me. I let go of a breath I wasn't even aware I was holding in. I make sure nowadays to leave the store using the buddy system. I never walk alone, and I always make sure I'm hyper aware of my surroundings. I never wear my name tag anymore. Luckily, nothing happened to me, and maybe I was overthinking the entire experience. But I wanted to stress that even if your job is in customer service, if someone makes you feel uncomfortable, speak up. You should not have to be subjected to this kind of behavior at your work or anywhere for that matter. I'm a woman, and I was 52 at the time of this. I was traveling by car to an out-of-town job assignment. I had stopped at a popular and busy gas station to fill up the car, stretch my legs, and use the restroom, and probably grab a snack. I was approached by a developmentally disabled woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s. She was looking for a ride to a town a couple of towns over. I guess her ride had abandoned her while she was in the restroom. That was her story. At least was a little bit upset, and she didn't have a cell phone and didn't know any phone numbers so I could call someone to help her. I checked with the employees at the store, and they said that she had been there for over an hour looking for a ride because she said her friends left her while she was in the restroom. I then made the decision to do something I've never done before: offer a stranger a ride. I wasn't going to the town that she wanted to go to, but I was heading in that general direction. I told her I could drop her off at the grocery store in the next town where I would be turning off to go to my destination. The store was always busy, and it was very likely she'd have an easier time getting her ride to where she wanted to, though also she'd be 5 miles away from where she wanted to go instead of the 25 miles originally, and she would obviously have an easier time walking that distance if she had to. This was agreeable to her, and we set off right away. I noticed a van following us. I tried to lose the van, but I kept pace. Meanwhile, the woman wanted to play with my phone. I told her no, that it wasn't a toy. It was for work, and I moved out of her reach. The van speeds up and starts to get closer. The woman suddenly remembers her boyfriend's phone number, and we need to call him. I can't use my phone while driving. This was pre-sync era, and I was approaching the outskirts of the business district of the next town, and no cell phone use while driving signs were everywhere. I told her, we're almost to the grocery store, so we can call him from the parking lot when we get there. She becomes agitated and yells no. You have to take me home? I told you, I can't do that though. I said, I'm not going. There, it's in the opposite direction of where I need to go, and I'm expected soon. We'll call him from the parking lot. Like I said, after this, she becomes more upset and frustrated, and the van is now getting closer. I pull into the grocery store parking lot, and it's about 400 people. The store is busy. I pull up in the front of the store and ask for her boyfriend's number. Suddenly, she can't remember his number. She won't get out of my car, and now she's arguing with me. And the van is pulling into the parking lot out of sheer luck. There's a sheriff's deputy parked nearby, and I roll down my window and signal that I need to speak to him. He walks over and asks me what's going on. I tell him where I met this woman, and now she won't get out of my car, and under my breath, tell him the van has been following us. The deputy tells the woman she brought you where you asked her to. Now it's time for you to leave her car. She slowly gets out of the car, and I ask once more for her boyfriend's number, and she says, you're crazy, I don't have a boyfriend. Oh, look, they are my friends now, and she points to the damn van, the deputy, and I share a look, and he says, give me your contact info. I can delay them for about 20 minutes while I check their license and registration and lecture them about abandoning a special needs adult. You get out of here, and I'll check on you before my shift is over, and don't pick up any more hitchhikers. I left and went on to my destination. He later called me to make sure I got to where I was going and told me that they were keeping an eye on the van and its owner. He told me he also contacted a colleague at the sheriff's department in the county where I was working, and that she should contact me in a day or two while I was on assignment there. I spoke to 2 deputies and a detective about the woman and the van. No one ever told me anything about them, but they were very interested in them. My nightmare is one day I'll turn on a true crime show and see a report about this woman and her gang robbing and killing people. There's an unspoken rule up in the mountains that no matter who you are, friend, bidder, rival, stranger, anyone, if you're ever in a pinch and come across another hunter's cabin, you're welcome to seek shelter. There maybe it's unspoken because it's common courtesy and that whole do unto others thing, or maybe it's unspoken because there's hardly anyone to speak to in the winter months. Especially, you'd be hard-pressed to see another soul for weeks, sometimes even months. But that's the rule. You need it. You use it, no judgment, no questions asked, just don't steal anything thing. Now, I'm not a burly seasoned mountain man that flosses with tree bark and never shaves, but I do like to hunt. I often leave my small Alaskan village for weeks at a time and take to my hunting lodge. Up in the mountains, I'm a fairly cautious guy, and I know the mountains can be traitorous. So when I leave prepared. I check the long-term forecasts and gather the necessary supplies, bring backups, and make sure I've got enough of everything that I need to survive at least a week longer than I plan on staying, just in case. I always believed that my precautions would protect me, but like a child's security blanket, they were only a paper-thin illusion of safety. There's really no planning when Mother Nature decides she's in a mood. That's why I never expected to get caught in a blizzard this day it had. Started out sunny and cold, but as the day progressed, a few clouds formed. By the time they had massed into a heavy cloud covering, I was already on my way back to my cabin with a couple of hairs hanging over my shoulders. I'd named them dinner and breakfast. I was planning on eating breakfast for dinner and dinner for breakfast, if only to make myself laugh. It's the little things like that that keep solitude from turning into loneliness. The snowfall, seemed to come out of nowhere, like someone had knocked an awning shut and all the snow collected on top had fallen all at once, except it wasn't a single tidal wave off snow. It was a relentless, unending assault. Last I checked, the weather reports hadn't mentioned a blizzard, and yet a blizzard was what I found myself walking through. It got very dark, very fast, and I kicked myself for leaving my flashlight back at my lodge. I'd planned on coming home long before nightfall, so I hadn't thought I needed it. I'd been sorely mistaken. Snow prickled painfully as it darted into my eyes. I had squinted almost all the way to keep those sub-zero jerks from stabbing me blind. The wind howled as scales cut through my clothes and right to my bones. I could barely see 2 feet in front of me, and I couldn't see the 2 feet beneath me as I sank in an ever-growing blanket of white. I'm not sure when I realized I was lost. At some point, I knew it. Should have arrived at my cabin, but all I saw was white, with a few slivers of gray swaying in the thick breeze. The hairs at the back of my neck became stiff and battered against me with every puff of air and every awkward, crashing footfall. I was running out of energy, running out of ideas, and beginning to panic. I could have spun around in a computer chair 100 times and felt less disoriented, and I didn't. That white out. Then I walked right into a cabin. Literally, it had become so dark and the snow had become so heavy that I couldn't see the structure until I stumbled face first into it. I held my hands against the wood so I wouldn't lose it in the storm and circled around until I found a door. I wasn't just in a pinch. This was life or death in the unlikely event someone was inside. I knocked on the door and waited for an answer. Through the howling wind, I could have sworn I heard come in. As I swung open the door and stepped inside, a small avalanche of snow tumbled in with me. I didn't bother. Huckle, that's an understatement. Hungry. He exhaled. You got a fireplace? I asked. I've got a couple of hares. I'll cook them up. It's the least I can do. His reply was drawn out like a wolf howling, but without the majestic hum. No, okay, as soon as the blizzard dies down, I'll go gather wood and make a fire. Can you wait until then? I saw his silhouette shift slightly. There was a rattle of chains. No again, the yo stretched out in a long bloated groan. No, yes. The final no morphed strangely into a yes, like someone drastically changing to a much higher note on a flute halfway through a breath. I craned my neck to look at the single window. In the cabin, it was pitch black or pitch white. It was like an afterglow visible against the black backdrop of the wood, yet still inherently dark. I focused on it rather than the rest of the cabin because it was the only hint of light I could see. If you don't mind, I'm gonna try to catch some shy, I said tiredly. He didn't respond, but that didn't surprise me. Mountain folk don't talk much, even when they come down to town for what few supplies they can't make themselves. I shrugged it off and settled in for the night, but I felt something hard against my side. Sighing, I tossed my hairs back a bit farther and got comfortable. I was exhausted, so it wasn't all that hard for me to drift off. Despite the wind song playing outside the walls, I hugged myself in my sleeping bag and drifted off. I was awoken by a different sound, a weird snapping crunch that made me shoot up in my bed, believing the ceiling was about to collapse under the weight of the snow. I braced myself, but as the sound came again, I realized it wasn't above me, but rather next to me near my belongings. The silhouette was gone from the corner, and I could hear his deep, raspy breaths accompanying the crunch. What the hell are you doing? I snapped. He retreated back to his corner with a rattling of chains. My adrenaline was pumping, and I wasn't even sure why. Something about the stranger put me in a state of near panic. My instincts were telling me to leave, but I truly couldn't afford it, whatever this guy was up to. I was safer with him than I was out there in that blizzard. I grabbed my backpack and propped myself against the wall, in a seated position, staring at the silhouette, expecting him to make a move. I kept myself awake and alert, never looking away, even as the howling wind slowly diminished in strength. Once or twice I felt my head begin to dip and my eyes begin to shut, but every time I slipped, the faint rattle of chains snapped me back into consciousness. As the blizzard cleared and the sun slowly rose, light began to trickle into the cabin. The scene filtered through in tiny increments, with each layer uncovered by the sun, like a printer slowly spitting out the full picture, one line at a time. I wasn't even in a cabin. I was in a large supply shed that was maybe 10 to 11 FD long and 7 to 8 FD wide. There was no fireplace, which makes sense for a supply shed. There were tools, traps, and rifles lining every wall. A silhouette in the corner slowly stopped being a silhouette and started being a distinct person, skinny. No, actually gaunt, pale. No, actually ghost. White man. No, it was a corpse. I was gutted. He was dead. Not, oh shoot, I died overnight. Sorry about that. Dead, like long dead, long dead. His body was all shriveled and mummified, if that's even the right word for it. He wasn't wrapped up in bandages or anything like that, but his skin was completely dehydrated and stiff like an unwrapped mummy. His hair was hanging from his head in unkempt strings. His teeth were poking out of his shrunken lips with a wide gap where the top right canine should have been. There was a stain of age-old blood soaked in the wood beneath him. I followed it by gaze to its origin, his left foot, and the B-trap in, which it had been gotten caught. There was an empty hook on the wall above him with a chain leading to the trap. It was long enough for him to move around, but not enough for him to reach the front door, or the saw hanging above it. My best guess was the trap had fallen on its own while he was out, and at some point he'd done a supply run in the dark and probably had gotten caught in his own trap. He probably died of thirst or something. Look, I'm telling you, he wasn't breathing, and he wasn't moving. He was dead as a doornail and had been for quite some time. I sat there reasoning I'd been delirious the night before, the fatigue, the dehydration, the disorientation caused by the blizzard. It made me imagine a voice. Those slow hissing sounds I thought were replies were just the wind outside. I interpreted them wrong because the loneliness had finally gotten to me. The elements had conspired against me to create a living person out of someone who definitely wasn't living. It was a good logical explanation, and I wish I could say it was true. I'm an avid hunter. I go every season, and I love it more often than not. I don't kill any game, but I just love getting out in the woods. I don't know if you're familiar with hunting seasons in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle season is in full swing. It was already the second week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it early in the morning, and I did. I normally get up around 5:0 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns, and him and I are the only two to hunt on it, and the rest is posted to hunters, the only others on the land employed on my grandfather's farm. I had originally planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up and asking him if he wanted to tag along, but the weather that morning was horrendous. The snow was pouring down and the wind was really strong. You see, I love hunting in the snow, but it almost made me decide not to go, so I knew he wouldn't want to. The roads were really bad, so it took me a bit longer to drive there normally. The sun would be starting to rise by now, however, it was overcast and snowing regardless of the snow. I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house over a hill, and back about 100 to 150 yards almost immediately. Upon sitting in my spot, I hear things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay it much mind. It could be any number of things, but it was still pitch black, and the thought that it was a deer had crossed my mind, but there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I can shoot at it, so I just ignore it and continue to wait. It wasn't much longer after that I began hearing something walking just over the ridge to my right. At this point, there's barely enough light to see my feet, so even if it was a deer, there was still nothing I could do. However, I could tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather walking to his spot, which is just a short walk from mine, but the lights in his house were off, and if he was hunting up here, I'm sure he would let me know prior. But even if it wasn't him, it was a hunter, albeit hunting illegally. I still wanted to let him know I was there, so I turned on my flashlight and pointed it in his direction, flashing it several times again. Even if it was a deer, I couldn't shoot it. So I felt it was better to be safe rather than sorry. Nothing much happened after that. After I flashed my light, the noise stopped, which was really odd. I didn't hear them turn back, so I figured they either sat down right there after seeing my light, which is considered extremely rude, or B, I didn't hear them walk off. I just assumed it was the latter. An hour or so passes, and finally, the first sights of daylight start to shine through. It's still snowing, and the snow is falling in entire snowballs, rather than snowflakes, so visibility is pretty limited. But I just grin. I love snow, and even if I couldn't see any deer, I still found the weather beautiful. It was around this time that I noticed an odd-looking lump protruding out from a group of trees and shrubs atop the hill that separates me from my granddad's house, right where I had heard movement earlier. It looked like a mound of dirt. However, it was sticking out from the side of a tree, so it obviously wasn't dirt. Naturally, I raised my rifle up to take a closer look. I could immediately tell that I was looking at the side of an older style camouflage coat. It took a minute, but it finally clicked. That was a person over there. I just thought it was a hunter, so I didn't know what to do about it. I knew he was hunting on our land illegally, and from what I could see, he wasn't wearing anything orange, which is required of all hunters during it rifle season, and I could tell just from looking whoever this was wasn't my grandfather. I sat there for a minute debating my next move, but I decided to call my granddad at the risk of blowing his hunt if that was him over there, so without taking my eyes off this guy, I pulled out my phone and dialed. His number, to my dismay, he picked up. I told him what was going on, so he told me he'd make his way up, but I decided to go on my own to give. The guy had whistled to let him know I see him, but he didn't react at all after a few minutes. I started to walk up to this guy after walking a short distance. I could clearly see him. He was sound asleep, tucked in between a shrub and a couple of trees. He obviously thought out where to lay down, as I would have never been able to see him had his coat not stuck out, and as I thought he had no orange on, I gave him another whistle month. Louder, and he woke right up, almost immediately shuffling over to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he looked like a harmless old homeless man, probably in his 50s. But he had a perfect view of my granddad's home from his spot, and I have a pretty good idea what he was planning to do once my granddad left the house. Once this guy realized he had been caught, though, and saw a mad 6'5" guy carrying a hunting rifle less than 10 yards away, making his way closer. His face went pale almost instantly. He tried to feed me some that he had gotten lost during a drive with a group of other hunters. For those of you that don't know, a driver is a coordinated push through a thicket in order to drive deer to hunters sitting at the end of the designated driving area. However, the closest public game of land is miles from his spot, so I knew this was a lie. He just kept on going about how he was lost and how he fell asleep, even went as far to make up a fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't make any fishy movements. I couldn't help but think about what this guy could have done to my grandfather. God knows he had the chance, and that thought pissed me off enough to tell the guy to shut the hell up. That's about the point where I saw my granddad. My granddad is a tough old bastard, so my first thought was this idiot is going to get himself killed. Luckily, nothing happened after he got there. We practically had to drag this guy down the road where my granddad called the cops, and I called my dad. Technically, this guy hadn't done anything wrong yet, so all we could charge him with was trespassing and suing. That was about a month ago, and since then I haven't heard anything else about him.